Good day and welcome to Because Growth Matters, the podcast for sales professionals, business leaders, and growth-driven teams. I'm your host, Daniel Robus, and we're here to rethink how we lead, coach, and grow in today's fast-changing sales landscape. Today, I am delighted to welcome Tracy Embree to Because Growth Matters. Tracy is an accomplished sales and business leader with a career spanning a while across industries, including manufacturing, technology, and high-growth environments. Tracy's leadership style is characterized by clarity, resilience, and relentless commitment to growth, both in businesses that she leads and people that she mentors, and we've heard that in a couple of sessions. Tracy, you've played several very senior roles in organizations. You've had to navigate complex challenges, deep carpet C-level discussions. You've built teams, you've left teams, you've joined teams. Before we get into it, Tracy, I just want to say good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to you.
Your LinkedIn bio simply says United States. Where do you call home today?
I call Fort Myers, Florida, my home today.
And if I had to go to Fort Myers, Florida for a day, what would you recommend I do?
If you like to eat good fish or seafood, I recommend that you go find any place that is close to the water and have a meal that has fresh fish or seafood in it.
Are you a native to that area? Have you always lived there or have you moved there recently?
No, we moved here probably about 2 years ago full time, but we were coming here frequently for vacations. So our family is fairly local, so it makes it a little bit easier to call this place home.
Oh, that is so cool. And one more question about it.
Mhm.
What keeps your heart there?
It's nice to wake up to sunshine and palm trees every day. I'm not lying if I if I say that. But my son is a junior in college and he goes to school just north of where I live, a couple hours north at University of South Florida in Tampa. So it's nice to be close to him, but not too close, but close enough.
My 19-year-old leaves on Sunday to go back to, we call it university, to school, and she's 1,500 kilometers away. I'm not anticipating joyful parting on Sunday. It really hurts, this getting old thing, with the kids. Oh, my word. Tracy, you've been operating at a very high level for a while. How did you get there? What happened in your early career that gave you these opportunities that got you through?
There were several things that happened. I mean, the two most important things that happened for me were number one, I had a tremendous sponsor who was always, advocating for me in places where I wasn't, which is, what a sponsor does. But also, he was willing to personally take risks on me and put roles in front of me or opportunities in front of me that allowed me to perform and show my skills to other people. So having a great sponsor was one. And then the other thing was when I was given some really unique job opportunities. I mean, even from the very start of my career, that would have felt very risky to many people, whether it was personal risk or professional risk. And I always said yes to some of those really risky things that a lot of friends and colleagues of mine, said, "Why did you say yes to that?" And it turned out that I learned a lot of things really quickly as a result of saying yes to those things and also was able to show what I was capable of.
That's amazing. When I speak to young graduates, I always say for the first 10 years of your career, step forward, lean in, do everything, work until you are just people know you're a go-to person. And I think you talk to that as well. What did you study?
I studied chemical engineering, was my major, and I minored in music in university. And then I went on to do an MBA.
Chem eng and music. That is incongruent completely, but I love it so much because it's the logic and it's the art all together. My father-in-law used to say there's two types of engineers, chem eng and the rest of the rabble. Did you ever use your chem eng or did you go straight into leadership and sales?
No, I definitely used it. The first company that I started with out of college, I was doing a pure engineering role for them and was able to travel around to different manufacturing sites and work with lots of chemists and help commercialize things. Because of that experience, though, that it led me to ask more questions about, well, why don't engineers get to meet with the brand managers, or how do engineers get to influence certain things? So I was always asking to learn about new things, and fortunately got an early job in a plant where I was leading teams in the operation. I recognized that was the heart of everything. Our customers, we shipped things directly to the customers. The orders came into the factory, schedules were made, promotions happened, and it was our job to figure out how to make those happen on time. And so I asked for that assignment very early. And I think that really set the stage for going on to take different roles beyond just the engineering technical roles, but that could use a full suite of my analytical skills plus other things.
What was the spark that said to you, leadership and sales, let's go that way? How did you move from off the factory floor into the carpeted area?
Well, I think I always was asking a lot of questions, and I always wanted to be closer to the customer effectively. The customer was making, the purchase decisions. And I recognized that was a critical part of the value creation, right? If we didn't have customers, then the manufacturing plants didn't work, and then the engineers didn't have projects to work on, and the circle wouldn't continue. As I moved through getting my MBA, which I did because I recognized I needed some more commercially oriented skills. I would argue now you have more opportunity as an engineer to take more externally oriented classes if you want. And at the time, it was really, really purely technical. So I did my MBA so I could learn some more business and commercial oriented topics. And so then as I continued to take roles, it was about how do I continue to expand and learn and grow and fill out a portfolio that allowed me to keep getting closer and closer to the customer.
Amazing. I love that you wanted to be closer to the customer. And I think it's so tempting to hide away from the customer behind the bureaucracy and behind the production plants and that. What do you think the biggest misconception young people, young execs have about sales leadership and leadership in general?
I will tell you what mine was as when I first came out of school, I had a view that being a salesperson was all about meeting on the golf course and doing all that sort of thing. And of course, there is a good part of sales, which is about relationship building and continuing to get to know people and their businesses in a variety of places. But there's also a very analytical piece to being a good salesperson, and a really, good strategic piece about understanding what your competition's doing and what the industry trends might be, and how does your value proposition for your company fit into those things. Those are things that I would say I didn't really understand a whole lot until I got my first sales role. And ironically, it was when I got my very first sales role, I had never done sales before, and I was kind of just thrown into it. And there were a bunch of problems. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. And I remember telling my boss one day, I said, well, basically, I figured out, at least in this role, being a good salesperson is if I can help solve these problems that the customer is having, whether it's problems with us or problems in their own business, I said, I think everything is good, right? We grow, they grow. And it sounded really simple, but I wouldn't have told you that that's what sales was from my perspective until I was kind of thrown in the middle of it. And it didn't mean that I always got to say yes to them either. It just meant I had to be solution oriented. And that was a very different perspective than what I had assumed before that.
We talk about Sherpaing our customers. So selling won't help, but helping will sell. I think you summarized it better than I did there. And that whole awakening that if we help that person, there will be a mutual beneficial at the end of it. And that, translates into a sell. I love that. You spoke about your mentor taking a risk on you. Was it a risk for them to put you into sales?
Sure. I mean, I had never done it before. So they had, I think for anyone early career, you're kind of always faced with this conundrum of wanting to try something new, but you've never demonstrated specific capability in that area, right? That's common. And so, of course, I'm sure that felt risky, especially when there were other people who had, been in the sales function for a while. I kind of came in and it was new for me. But the difference was, I think I showed a lot of aptitude and capability and curiosity and, belief. So therefore, it didn't feel as risky to me or to him as maybe other people might have thought.
I don't know if I even want to ask you this question, but I'm going to. You've worked in many levels and you progressed quite quickly. When I look from the outside, that glass ceiling of a lady in the boardroom doesn't seem to have impacted you. How much BS is that? How hard has it been to get in heavy manufacturing in the plant, chem eng, team lead, then sales? Like, what don't I see?
I think intrinsic to who I am, I was always that girl in school that was doing things that not all the other girls did. So it was almost like I didn't really realize that world that I was operating in was unusual until you'd be in it and then you'd look back and go, "Oh, okay, that is a little different." I came from a fairly traditional family. My parents were lovely and supportive and proud of me, but they weren't in fact, my dad was in sales for 36 years, which is awesome to be talking to you. But they didn't know much about being an engineer or, being in an industrial company where there weren't many women. That was really not something that they were able to guide me from. So I was always just kind of figuring it out as I went through it. The thing that I always struck me as I reflected on it was I always had belief. I always had belief that I could be successful. I had belief that other people around me would be willing to help me. Probably I was a little naive sometimes that maybe that might not always be the case, but quickly learned that when that wasn't happening, I was able to find allies or other people who valued my capabilities and, wanted to collaborate and partner and recognize that our joint success was success for the company. So I always looked for allies along the way.
I'm sure there were a couple of tough moments. If you had to speak to a class of girls coming through today or a class of grads, let's just talk to graduates, what three things, advice would you give for them to succeed in your field and follow kind of in your footsteps?
I do think that word belief is really important. I always start there. You need to believe in your own capabilities first and foremost. The other thing I tell people is I tell them run towards the hard stuff, the things that people don't want to do. Quite frankly, I had a terrific job at one point, and it was actually, one of my dream jobs, but part of the business, things were not good. And when I went in, I remember someone said, "Why do you want that job?" And I said, I don't really think I personally can make it any worse than it is right now. Market forces, like the industry that we operated in was going down fast. It was one of those things where you get this beautiful field of play to try new and different things and take risks because there's really not much to lose. And so I thought, well, it can only get better. Even if I make a little bit of progress, maybe, that will feel like a lot in this environment. So that's the other thing. I tell people, don't be afraid of the jobs that no one wants and run towards the hard things, because those two things coupled with belief, you'll be able to accomplish anything.
There's a couple of nuggets there that I'm going to take if you don't mind. What's on your C-level whiteboard now that you're dealing with that wasn't there a year ago?
The answer is probably the same thing that others have said, but I'm actually thinking a lot about kind of this AI revolution we're in the middle of right now and the implications of how AI will change how we get work done, the speed at which things will move, and also just the ability to still have to remain a great critical thinker as you're getting these assists from a variety of places. I remember being in college when I say the internet was just born, and I remember logging on to Yahoo, like the first week it came live. And I remember thinking, this thing is going to change everything. And as I've been personally experimenting with different AI platforms, I feel the same way now as I did, in the mid 90s about what was going on then. It feels very similar, except I think the speed at which change is happening is going to be even faster. So that's on my mind. I think a lot about the leadership skills that it's going to take to get through this. And, there's always this push and pull on, as leaders, you have to make decisions really quickly, but there's also times where patience is really, really important. I'm thinking a lot about how does this new revolution that's being driven by AI change the leadership competencies that are going to be required. They could be quite different. And I think more expansive on the emotional intelligence side as a result of some of these analytical tools that are coming in. So what does that mean for people who aspire to be leaders, and, thinking about patience and how that falls into pace and all these things. That's kind of one of the things I'm thinking about a lot.
I love that. How do you balance long-term vision with short-term demands? How do you balance where the roadmap is versus the quarter end pressures? What's your secret?
The starting point for me is, generally, are we in a healthy spot with the strategy? Does the strategy that's been articulated, is that going to be disrupted for any other reason? I mean, if you see your strategy needing to shift, then, that's a different ball game where you may be optimizing for a little bit more in the short term until you can re-architect the strategy and tell that story and get alignment with your stakeholders. But if you're in a spot where your strategy is still going to hang together despite uncertainty, despite disruption, and you're delivering against proof points in the strategy to show progress, it gives you a little bit more time to show.
We're massive fans of the week 13 cycle, and that makes your strategy a living, breathing document as opposed to a bottom drawer exercise. And I know you understand that concept. I find it amazing that we've got leaders that put these strategies together and then look at them once a year. It's like driving a vehicle with your hand in front of your eyes. It's crazy for me. So I'm so glad you emphasized that. You've seen a lot of leaders. You've dealt with a lot. You've negotiated and you've built a lot of them. What mistakes do you see being made again and again and again? And how do you think we can avoid them? Can we learn from that wisdom?
I'm a big believer that collaboration is a critical skill set for any executive leadership team. I think that it's collaboration both at a strategic level and a tactical level. And so one of the things that I've seen a couple times are where there's been a lack of alignment on the strategy or the vision, or even what that means for people who have to go execute those things. And I think the best way to get there is to go through that messy middle of collaboration. And this can be hard sometimes because collaboration, as you know, Daniel, it could mean you have to slow down to go a little faster sometimes because you got to bring people with you through that journey. And when I've been parts of teams where we've had to kind of recontract on our go forward, it's because we didn't bring enough people along with us to get that alignment. And so it's that balance there, and it's collaborating to get alignment on the strategy so you can go fast on execution.
So you're big on culture, and that culture is one where we've got to build it to be people can feel safe that they are different and that they can contribute in that. How do you manage folks who come into that for the first time and they kind of dictatorial?
I remember one of my early experiences on a senior leadership team, and I call it this moment when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Personally, I have a physical sensation, and I remember being on this team and it was full of amazing, incredible leaders. And I knew that I was brought onto that team because I was a leader who had lots to contribute as well. But I was struggling to get my voice into the conversation. And it wasn't that there was someone dictatorial, but it was one of those environments where people were talking over each other, not necessarily listening. We were circling, and which to me is, you may as well just be in a dictatorial environment. It's kind of the same outcome. But I remember that sensation that these hairs stood up on the back of my neck. And what that means for me when I feel that is I have to say something, even if it's going to come out a little clunky or awkward or maybe not with the finest words, but I have to lean into that feeling in that moment because it's a signal to me that we're not making the progress we need to make, or we're missing something that we've said is important to us as a team. And in that moment, and I remember it was within the first 30 days on that team, I think I raised my hand to signal I've got something to say because things were going so quickly. So I physically raised my hand and everyone was like, "What?" And I said, I have to go back to this conversation we just had. And I used this moment to just say, I'm feeling personally a little frustrated. And here's what I observed. Here's what I saw. Here's what it felt like for me. And I don't think that, I struggled to get in. I noticed other people struggled to get in, and we want to listen to all the ideas. And I just think we behaved like a team that wasn't what we said we wanted to do. I just kind of gave this feedback in the room, and I thought, oh my God, my boss is going to kill me. And actually, it was a moment where everyone just slowed down and said, oh, wow, I got thanked for stopping the conversation. We summarized where we were at. We did go back and bring in the contributors that were struggling to get in, and it changed a little bit of the outcome. But it was that sort of feeling that happens to me, whether it's, where you started, which was, with a leader who might feel like, it's their way or the highway or something else. But it's that, like, I personally get this physical sensation and I'm like, I have to say something, especially if I know that the team's value or orientation isn't, our outcomes aren't going to happen the way we wanted.
You've been saying so much, I've messed my hair up. It's so good. I'm really enjoying that. I had a haircut just in anticipation of today. I hope you like the new smart Daniel here. Let me bring it back to this reflection. You've had a couple of moves. You were in one particular environment for a while, and then you've moved. Is it tough at an exec level to find a home after being somewhere for a long time?
I think it can be. I think, for me, that I was lucky and fortunate to have the privilege of working with an outstanding executive coach for, I don't know, a decade. And she really helped as I was contemplating changing companies after almost 24 years at one place. She really helped me think about and make sure that I was clear-headed on what are the environments that I know I thrive in, what are the cultural cues that matter to me, and how does that couple with the things that I want to accomplish and achieve in my life, work or otherwise. Because I had that grounding, it was clear to do that. The challenge in that is, of course, you only see so much data when you're making that change. But once you're somewhere and you have a chance to continue to collect more data against your baseline. And then it's, for me, really, it just continued to be a check against how does this place compare to the things that I know are in an environment I want to thrive in? Or have I accomplished the things that I set out to accomplish personally? Or am I having the impact or using the skills that I know I want to use? And so continuing to test against those things is incredibly important.
I was looking at a couple of stats. You talk about numbers, about the movement from C-levels post-COVID. And the movement has been huge. And, some of the input is it's moving because we want different lives, or some of it is we're moving because we don't want pressure. And where do you think we are? Where do you think we are on that?
It's hard. I mean, this coming out of COVID, I think most C-level executives have seen more change in a short period of time than maybe they had seen for multiple decades before that, right? It's been an incredibly dynamic environment with, the stakes being raised from investors or other stakeholders. And whether you're employees and what you expect as an employee, whether you're a customer, whether you're a supplier, or whether you're a shareholder, right? All of those pressures have shifted quite a bit. And, especially, I mean, pretty much everywhere in the world, the environment in which we're doing business seems to have more uncertainty and not less. So it's harder. I mean, you might not like the decision that somebody makes policy wise, but at least you have certainty, right? So the level of uncertainty that business leaders are dealing with today is incredible. It's incredible. And so I'm not surprised. I've read the same statistics that you have about the amount of movement. I forget the number, but I read something about how the last 2 years, the number of CEO changes that are happening it's exponential. And I don't think that's happening because necessarily, I mean, of course, there's always some that are performance related, but I don't think those are all performance related. I think there's a lot of C-levels who said, hey, I'll stick around, I'll get us through this time. And they're at a place right now where they're like, personally have to make this shift. I think it's harder too, because I think a lot of the people that worked on those teams experienced a lot of the same things, especially with leaders who are, I call it, really good at developing, future CEOs and have been sharing sharing development opportunities with their teams. Anyone who's been a C-level in an environment like that is feeling similarly. So I think it's a hard shift right now.
What advice would you give to young execs who want to aspire to be C-level execs? What are the 3 ingredients that they need or that you've learned that they should have that's not common sense?
I think it goes, know what you need in order to thrive, whether it's the environment you want to do work in, what motivates you, what keeps your energy up. Know yourself and keep doing that work because it changes, right? I mean, it changes things as we get older. I mean, as you know, you've got kids going to university and your priorities change and shift as you go through phases of life and how you want to spend your time, what matters for you and how you spend that time and who you spend it with starts to shift. I know I personally, my dad passed away in October of 2022 and it was fast. He was not sick and then he was, and 9 days later he was gone. And I know since then I've had the, chance to kind of step back and say, wait a minute, right? Watching my mom cope with the grief of losing him sooner than she expected. And how is that informing the choices that I'm making with how I spend my time? And honestly, I can tell you that it's changed a lot of how I think about what I wanted to be spending my time on. And that's part of the reason for me, I'm pivoting to different work now because I've reflected on that. And, I'm fortunate to have an incredibly supportive partner who carried most, if not all, of the burden of raising our son while I was working and traveling and doing all that. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, hey, I kind of like that guy who supported me. And I want to be able to spend plenty of great time with him while I'm able-bodied and healthy and all these things. Because I've been able to see what's happened to family and friends of mine. And, I think there's plenty of other ways I can still contribute and make an impact and do good work, but I can do it in different ways that'll afford me a little bit more flexibility.
Sure. There's a lot there. That's really good. If you had to start over today, what would you do differently?
Oh boy. I have no regrets about anything that I've done. I've made some choices along the way that maybe I've learned from, but that's the joy in those choices. If I hadn't done them that way, I wouldn't have learned it. I don't know that I would do anything differently. I just don't.
That talks to a life well lived. And if we look back and we enjoy the highlights reel, I think we're doing things right. There's few people who can go back and say, gee, I can now make choices. And that's a privilege. And I think you appreciate that. You're going to be seeing people working through these things, going and making the same mistakes, and hopefully we can help them through it. If you had to mentor someone now, you probably are already, what are you saying to them for the next 2 years? Where is the focus for a mentor now? We understand AI, they got to get their feet under the desk, become proficient. But what, from a sales perspective, is going to drive the number, in your opinion? Where should they be driving their leadership?
I've been coaching people for decades, mentoring them, and I still think that this matters a lot. The thing I always remind people to do is figure out, like, ruthlessly prioritize, figure out what the number one most important thing is. And I think it's even more important now because there are so many things flying at us all the time, that how you parse through the noise to stay focused on the critical few it's even harder and more important now. I mean, I remember a conversation I had with a woman years ago, and she came in to me and she was struggling with trying to figure out, like, how can I get this done and get that done? And remember asking her, I said, okay, those are three things, but what's your number one? And she said, well, they're all my number one. And I said, no, today, right now, in this moment, what's your number one? If you only have 24 hours, what's your number one? And I said, and by the way, your number one can change tomorrow, but you can't have a regret, about you get only one number one. And tomorrow you make a different choice, and that's fine. But that sort of, how do you focus and don't lose yourself in the noise, is so important. And that's how you stay focused on growth, because without that, you could be chasing the wrong squirrel if you're not careful.
I've just come off a class on prioritizing your impact and being able to identify that number one, that one thing, the one thing that'll make everything else easier or no longer relevant, is just something that so few leaders manage, but the exceptional leaders get immediately, because it makes such a difference. I'm so glad you brought that up. Book, podcasts, movie, documentary, what should we be watching? Where does Tracy give her attention to stay ahead of the game, from leadership, from sales, from wherever?
I will confess, I like a good mix of, non-cerebral type things to read and watch, because it keeps my brain a little fresh, actually.
Awesome. What are you watching? What are you binging at the moment?
There's a comedian that I love here in the States. Her name's Leanne Morgan. She and I are close in age, and so I feel like she's super relatable. And she has a new show coming out at the end of the month on Netflix. So I've been kind of watching a bunch of her recordings and things like that, getting ready for that. So that's kind of my fun stuff right now. I am a big reader. I love reading. And, I do skim, like, I love the Harvard Business Review for short, kind of helping to aim me, because oftentimes I'll read an article there and it sends me down a wormhole for other things. So all the AI things I've been reading, then that led me to starting to do some Coursera work on AI and go down some seminars on prompting. And, I'm calling my son at school going, hey, I'm learning this. And it's interesting because I feel like I'm keeping up with him, which is kind of fun. So I've been really investing a lot of my time in just experimentation, and I'm playing with tools, trying things, using it for research, using it to help me put together presentations for things in my personal life that I'm having to take on right now. And I'm actually finding, like, as a productivity hack, it's incredible. So I'm doing that right now. That's kind of the thing I'm going down. And it's like, I want to get my hands in it. I think about my role, like, on boards as a director. The more that I can actually see, touch, and feel some of these things and experience it, it helps me think about, this might be how, the type of transition a leadership team might go through, or people who are in my generation who are still in active management roles, what they might be experiencing. And that's why I love talking to my son about it, because he's the generation of people entering the workforce now. And so I get this amazing dichotomy of expectation and experience, and how you can use it and what it can do and whether you believe it. And that, to me, is like how you continue to source and sense those things. And for me, that's what I'm doing on AI. So it's really more about experimenting and practicing than anything.
That is so cool. I've got 3.5 questions left for you, and then I'm going to let you enjoy your afternoon. My first question is, if you had to look at a leader to model yourself behind today, who would you suggest that we look at? Or who would you love to have lunch with that's an industry lead or an influencer that you could ask questions of that's walking today?
You mentioned Brene Brown earlier. I would love to sit down with her. She's played so many different roles in her life and quite frankly gone on this journey of, how does it feel to be your authentic self in front of all these people and now as a thought leader. And I would love to hear about how she made that transition from the things that she was doing at the beginning. I've read about them, but I want to hear her talk about them. I want to look at her face when she talks about them. Because again, I think it's the season of life I'm in about thinking about making career pivots and changing the portfolio of work I do. I'm just taking in all of that. And she's one that I would really, love to pick her brain on that.
Well, I'm with you. Can I have a seat next to you, please?
Yes, you're invited.
I'd have a Philly steak sandwich. That's what I'd have. If you were hosting this podcast, what question would you have asked Tracy Embree?
You asked a lot of the ones that I think are good. You kind of started with how'd you do it? And that's the question that people often ask me. And I mentioned a little bit about my dad being a sales guy and my family. So, maybe a little more about kind of my backstory outside of work, where I came from. Maybe that.
Your dad clearly made a role, like an impact on you. You had dad and mom together. It sounds like you had a great childhood. If you think back on your dad, what do you think he would say to you for this next chapter in your life? What is his name?
His name was Tom.
What do you think Tom would say to Tracy, to his little girl, about this next chapter in your life?
Oh, he would tell me to relax and have fun. It's what my dad would tell me. My dad knows how hard I've worked. I mean, my whole life. And my dad was always the fun he was always the one who was wanting us to laugh and have fun and do fun things. So I know that he got so much enjoyment out of watching not just me, but my other 3 siblings have fun and enjoy life. And I think my dad would be incredibly proud to know that I'm at a point in my life where I'm happy with the things that I've achieved and I'm focused on making an impact in a different way and being able to relax a little more than maybe what he's used to seeing. The only sad thing is I don't get to do more of it with him, but he's keeping an eye on it. I know he is.
That stage of leaving a legacy rather than leaving a will is what a privilege that you can do that and you can build a legacy. Tracy, to be fair, I said I stalked you. I understand where you've gone. You have already left a legacy, certainly on people's careers. It's really wonderful to speak to a leader like yourself because you are very humble in what you've achieved. You haven't spoken about those multiple accolades, and there's a lot that I've learned from this session. As my final question for you before thanking you for being here is, what is the one thing you believe if more leaders today embraced would improve their results by that 1%? What is the one thing that we should be raising the bar to for us as leaders?
I use this word a couple times in our conversation, but this word belief is a big darn deal for me. And when I think about more leaders embracing belief, it's about believing in the skills and capabilities of others. It's about believing in their abilities to nurture and hone those skills. It's about believing that it's going to be okay if someone makes a mistake and you're able to help them work through it. It's about believing that despite the chaos and uncertainty, the world will land in a spot where we do get the ability to move forward. I think that word belief is so important. And as a leader, how do you show belief? How do you invite it into your world? How are you patient enough to listen to others so you can start to make sure that you are demonstrating belief in other people's capabilities and not shortchanging those things. I think belief is central.
I really like that. And that belief and what you're talking about is taking the time and being patient. I think it was John Mark Comer who said, love walks slow. And if you've got the time and you can do the coaching and you can invest the time, yet it's the first meeting that's cancelled in a lot of leaders' diaries is this coaching and mentoring and growing of our people. So, Tracy, what are you up to before I let you go? What work are you doing as you move forward?
I am focusing my work now on board service. I've had the privilege of serving on a publicly traded company board for 9 years, and I recently switched to a different company, and I am adding a few more to my portfolio that I can't share yet, but I love that work. I get to learn about a lot of different industries, different teams, different problems, and I get to use my own set of experiences and skills in so many different ways. Plus, I get to build amazing relationships with my colleagues that serve on those boards as well, which is a lot of fun for me to do.
Amazing. Well, we wish you so well from Because Growth Matters. They're lucky to have you, and hopefully we'll get to see you as you continue and maybe invite you back. From me, Daniel, I want to thank you for your time. I know it's very precious, and thank you for investing in it, and thank you for investing in people authentically. It makes the world a better place. So from us to you, goodbye.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Because Growth Matters. If you got value from today's conversation, please take a moment to rate the show 5 stars on your listening platform and share it with someone who might benefit as well. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Catch you next week.